A game that is known as one of the best games ever made is Dark Souls. With its medieval gothic setting, intense gameplay, and a world filled with rich lore and characters, it's no wonder why it's so popular. With several memes, lots of merchandise, passionate fans, and other video games inspired by Dark Souls, the game will leave an impression on the world forever. As a gamer with a mild case of cerebral palsy, I sometimes struggle when I am playing games. My case mainly affects my left hand, so sometimes my hand does not do what I want it to. However, I like to challenge myself and push my disability to its limit. I became interested in Dark Souls because of its notorious difficulty. I also kept hearing people say, "Disabled people can't play Dark Souls." This agitated me, so I just had to play it. The games are very popular. So popular, in fact, that every time a new game comes out, some game journalists complain about the difficulty and demand an easy mode. Some other gamers complain too, saying that the difficulty prevents disabled people from playing. These discussions beg the question, should Soulsborne games really have an easy mode? In this video, I will talk about what a Soulsborne game is, difficulty and accessibility, my own experiences, and those of other disabled gamers, and I will state my conclusion on whether Soulsborne games should have an easy mode. Soulsborne is a role-playing game series by Japanese game studio From Software. Their first game, Demon's Souls, was released in 2009 for the PlayStation 3, while their latest game, Elden Ring, was released in 2022 for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. Other games in the series are Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Even though the games are Japanese, they have more of a Western style to them, with the character customization and the open-endedness of the world. However, the games are known for their difficulty, notoriously so. When you defeat an enemy, you get these soul-like items which you can use to upgrade your stats. When an enemy defeats you, there is a message in red text which says, "You died," and you lose all the souls in your possession, restarting at the last checkpoint. According to series director Hidetaka Miyazaki, the series is about overcoming hardship. He states in a GameSpot article, "I just want as many players as possible to experience the joy that comes from overcoming hardship. We are always looking to improve, but in our game specifically, hardship is what gives meaning to the experience. So it's not something we're willing to abandon at the moment, it's our identity. When I'm playing these games, I think, this is the way I'd want to die, in a way that is amusing or entertaining, or that creates a story I can share. Death and rebirth, trying and overcoming, we want that cycle to be enjoyable. In life, death is a horrible thing. In play, it can be something else." The gameplay embraces this philosophy. Yes, you may die a lot, but the gameplay is formulaic, which means you can learn from your mistakes. Enemies may be tough, but the more you fight them, the more you learn. There are other games not made by From Software that have a similar design to the Soulsborne games. These are known as Souls-like games, and some examples are Code Vein and Nioh. Players are frustrated by the overwhelming challenge despite the philosophy of learning from their mistakes, so that is why they're demanding an easy mode. They also think that the challenge is too difficult for disabled players. Now I'll move on to my next topic. I need to talk about difficulty options and accessibility. Difficulty options are making the game harder or easier based on the player's wants. If someone wants to experience a game just for the story, then they might choose the easiest difficulty. Conversely, if someone is finding their current difficulty lacking in challenge, then they might raise the difficulty. Some gamers believe that difficulty options are accessibility. However, that is not entirely true. Accessibility is based on the player's needs. A player may need to set the difficulty to make the game more accessible, but there are many factors that define accessibility. For example, a player might have trouble using their hands, like me, so they might need to remap the buttons on their controller, use an adaptive controller, or use in-game button assistance for QuickTime events. Perhaps they're visually impaired and might need font size options or audio cues. Some players are even colorblind, and more games are providing colorblindness options. The more needs that are met, the more accessible a game is. With all that said, difficulty options do not equal accessibility. An easy mode may make the game easier, but if a player is unable to play the game due to accessibility barriers, then difficulty options are useless. For example, I played The Last of Us on PlayStation 3. Since I do not typically play shooters, I had a super difficult time. I started on normal difficulty, then switched to easy, and I still had a difficult time. It's because there were not any accessibility options to help me with the gameplay. I struggled through the entire game. I didn't particularly enjoy it because of that. If only there were accessibility options, I think I would have loved it. Fortunately, a remake came out recently with many accessibility options, so maybe I'll pick it up at some point. Accessibility benefits everyone, and if a developer wants to appeal to as many players as possible, then accessibility is crucial. Sometimes there can be issues with difficulty options, such as balancing. An enemy in hard mode may have basically the same stats as in normal mode, but with more HP, making fights tedious. An easy mode may be a complete joke, with enemies having too low stats. Sometimes features are exclusive to certain difficulties, which is not okay. For example, in the original Resident Evil 4, you skip certain parts of the game on easy mode. In another game, Valkyrie Profile, you cannot get the true ending if you play on easy mode. These are things to take into mind with difficulty options. If not implemented correctly, they could hinder a gaming experience. With me, I have two disabled gamers who are willing to share their experience with Soulsborne and various opinions. Let's hear from them. Alright, this is the first person that I will interview. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mitch, or OmniMitch as my full name is. I don't really like to say it out loud. But
Oh,
damn, what should I say apart from that?
that's alright. Okay, and I'll ask you some questions.
Alright.
And your first question is, or my first question to you is, what is your disability?
Pretty much the same as yours. I know you like to use the full name. It was never used with my family, so I just called it cerebral palsy.
Okay.
um, it pretty much affects me the same way yours does, just on the opposite side, on my right arm and hand, most egregiously my right hand.
Yes, and how does that affect your ability to play video games?
Um, well, I like to call it the way of the raptor claw. Basically, I have to spread my entire hand over the controller.
Interesting. So that's how you make games more accessible to you.
Generally, yeah, that's all I need. Or just pretty much the only accessibility feature that I need to make most games accessible to me is button config, particularly in the games themselves. Relying on the system itself to do that is not the best way to handle that.
Yes, I have to
And
agree.
I can elaborate on that now or later if you'd like me to.
No, I think it's alright. So, what is your experience with the Soulsborne series?
I when did I don't know exactly how to check my purchase history on Steam, or else I could tell you when I bought
Or
the Souls
you could just
games.
say what are the games that you've played.
I've most recently finished. Actually, the only one I finished is Dark Souls 1.
You finished
I
it. Interesting. And was
Yes.
it really tough for you?
Well, first of all, I've also played bits and pieces of Dark Souls 3, not Bloodborne, I don't have PS4, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. Yeah, it's weird. My thing is, every time a FromSoft game comes out, I buy it, I play it for a few hours, and then I get the feeling, I really should play these games in order. So then I go back to Dark Souls 1.
Yeah,
But
I've
then
only played
just
Dark Souls 1.
but then just last year I actually sat down and played it start to finish.
Yes, it's good that you finished it. And so, do you think that difficulty options and accessibility are two different things?
Two different things. Not really sure how to approach this because the way I see it, accessibility options make games easier to play for specific people, and in that sense, effectively become easy mode.
Yes, that is true.
Now, in terms of what we typically think when we hear the words easy mode, we think of enemies doing less damage, maybe less RNG so that bosses are more predictable. In terms of that, when it comes to Dark Souls, before I can say that Dark Souls needs something like that, I would need to see what Miyazaki's idea of an easy mode is.
Yeah, and we really don't know. However, we do know his design philosophy. He wants players to overcome their challenges. And even if that means like dying a whole bunch of times, the players learn.
Mhm. My thing is, challenge is different for different people.
Exactly.
Like, there's challenge just from how the game is designed, and then there's challenge, oh, I can't, like you told me back when we talked a little while ago when you said, oh, you can't parry, and therefore the final boss is more difficult than it should be.
Yes.
That's not a skill issue. That's an accessibility problem.
Yeah. And an easy mode wouldn't exactly make things easier for me, like parrying the boss and stuff.
And I want to tell you that a replacement for a parry button could be a foot pedal, but I have one, and none of the FromSoft games. Okay, so I have this cheap little Chinese knockoff USB foot pedal that I bought for like $20, and there are a handful of my games on Steam where it'll recognize my USB foot pedal as a controller before my actual controller, and then none of my buttons work because of that, so I have to unplug it.
Yeah, that is an issue.
Um, Unplug my foot pedal. And that's not an issue with the game. I think that's just an issue with this foot pedal and its software that doesn't get updated anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, but I was just considering investing in Elgato's foot pedal that they just actually I think it's been out for a couple of years, but I was gonna buy one pretty
Perhaps that
soon.
would make games more accessible, and that's a good thing.
I will buy one, and then assuming it works, I will let you know. Because if it does work in more games, if the FromSoft suite doesn't like have a stroke about figuring out what my controller is, then you know what? A foot pedal may be a substitute for the parry button.
Yeah. And as a disabled gamer, I think like different controller options are fantastic. Like Xbox is really good, like especially with the adaptable controller.
I will say, and this is something I was made aware of because when I played Dark Souls 1, I played the remastered edition.
Yes, I did too.
We both played the remaster. The remaster has in-game button config, like just about any modern game nowadays. The Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 did not have button config in-game at all.
Yeah.
So if we played those, we would have to rely on like the Steam interface to change our buttons around. And I'd like to go into why that is not ideal.
Okay.
Relying on system interface to change for button config is not the best in the world because the in-game button prompts will not reflect the changes I make. Like, let's say the rolling button while you're moving to roll around, the dodge roll button in Dark Souls by default is B, I think. It is B.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. If I needed to change that to another button in the original version of Dark Souls 1, I would need to go into the Steam interface and change that around. But because I had to rely on the system itself pretty much, it's not the same thing as if it were on Xbox, I guess. But for the sake of entering this, I'll say system interface. Because I had to rely on the system interface, the game, when I started back up, I could change my roll button to A or something, but then I will go back into the game and it will still tell me to press B.
Yes, that's an issue.
Now, I'm not a programming aficionado, but that doesn't sound like it's difficult to fix. I can't imagine it's all that hard for a game to look at a system configuration and reflect button prompts accordingly. But if that is more difficult, well then the solution is to put the button config in the game itself.
Exactly.
Because the games that do have in-game button config don't have this issue.
Yes, and putting a button config in like each game makes that game more accessible.
And this is one reason I would like to redo my own video on this subject, because when I made my own video on this subject, I had like 2 days to do it for a school project. Yes. So it's noticeably rushed, and I remember at one point I tried to say, I mentioned how Dark Souls doesn't have in-game button config and how I had to rely on the system and everything I just explained to you. But when I said that, I showed Dark Souls 3 footage on the screen, which is a game that does have in-game button config.
Mm-hmm.
Me when I spread blatant misinformation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to redo my own video on this subject.
Yeah, alright. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview. Any last words you want to say?
Basically, earlier I said that before I can definitively say whether or not Soulsborne needs an easy mode, I would need to see what easy mode is according to Miyazaki. Okay, I actually have a lot to say on this. So you set it up like this was the end, but not quite. Basically, different developers and different genres of game expect different levels of skill from the player. And oftentimes...
Yes, I agree with that.
Oftentimes, when I'm playing a new genre of game or a new series by a new developer I've never played before, I will often play on easy because I don't know what I'm getting into.
Yes.
Like most recently, before we started, while we were talking, I mentioned I'm playing Mass Effect right now. I'm a complete noob to Mass Effect, and I don't know what to expect, so I was playing on easy.
Okay.
At least I'm pretty sure about that. But see, like I said, every developer has a different idea of what difficulty options mean, and some of them are a little bit insulting. Like, Resident Evil 4, the original version from 2005, has difficulty options, and the easy mode in that game actually removes entire portions of the game
Yes, I actually talked about that in my script.
That you don't have to play them. And
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not easy mode, that's not accessibility, that's just an insult to my intelligence, I think.
Yes.
So
You're disabled. You shouldn't play this segment, so we're going to remove it.
that's why I'm saying, before I can make a definitive answer whether Soulsborne needs an easy mode, I need to see what that means in the mind of Miyazaki.
Exactly.
Now, I don't think I'm going to see that as far as Dark Souls goes. Maybe Armored Core 6. I don't know. I never played Armored Core. But those are my thoughts. This is kind of hard to make a judgment call until I see Miyazaki attempt it.
Yes.
But I will say that as someone who, as of this interview, has finished a Dark Souls game and now knows what I'm getting into, knowing that I was able to beat Dark Souls 1 as it is, if it did have an easy mode, I probably wouldn't use it myself.
Yeah, I don't think I would either. All right,
So,
thank you so
those are my
much.
thoughts. You're welcome.
Okay, with me, I have a second person today. All right, introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Hazel. I've been a Soulsborne player for around 9 years now.
That is amazing. All right, tell everyone about your physical disability.
So I have a lot of stuff wrong with my body, but most of all, my fingers are like very uncoordinated. I've had issues with everything from holding a pencil to, like eating spaghetti in my life. So my nerves were apparently, I don't know, never was taught the full details in my life, but I had some issues with my nerves when I was born. I've had to work on overcoming that.
Yeah, okay, so how does that affect your ability to play Soulsborne games?
I mean, when I first started playing Soulsborne, I very much struggled with the controls because Dark Souls is a very unconventional control style. With the attack and block being the bumpers of the controller rather than like X, for example, which is pretty common for games on like Xbox or Square on the PlayStation.
Yes.
But on top of it, I'm also autistic, so it was really it was a challenge. I'll say with Dark Souls is the control scheme, learning how the iframes and everything worked, how dodging and stamina management worked. The games were pretty difficult my first time around playing them. It took me actually a very long time to beat Dark Souls 1.
Yeah, it took me a very long time to beat Dark Souls as well. In fact, it took me around 70 hours.
My first time ever playing Dark Souls, when around the time it came out, I got it as a gift for Christmas from my brother. I never actually finished it until years later.
Yeah, sometimes gamers are like that.
Like Dark Souls didn't super click with me at first. And I think a big thing about Dark Souls is it's like drinking alcohol. It's like it sucks and it's gross at first, but like eventually you get used to it and you end
Yes.
up enjoying the small little good things about the flavors.
Yeah, Dark Souls is brutal, but it's all about overcoming your challenges.
Yeah, and that's a big thing I really like about especially the first Dark Souls, because I feel like they kind of lose the theming in Dark Souls 2 a little bit. But Dark Souls 1 is very much a story about hope. And I found Dark Souls in a very dark time in my life, which is one thing that pushed me through the game is, like I was very depressed at the time, and I kind of saw the story of Dark Souls through the lens of depression and learning to not give up.
That's very interesting. Thank you for telling us about your experiences. Okay, so I have another question, and that is, do you think that difficulty options and accessibility are different?
Yes, actually, because for example, I have epilepsy, and I never really see any options to stop flashing lights in games or whatever. I usually just get a warning about it, being like, "Hey,
Oh,
there's
that is
flashing
a
light.
serious
Deal with it."
problem.
And like, if we want to talk about accessibility options in Sekiro, would have really liked some options to tone down the flash of the swords clashing when you did deflects in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, or the constant ringing noise because I'm more prone to headaches and migraines due to my condition. But you never really see anything like that. I feel like accessibility options are for like autocomplete QuickTime events,
Yes.
um, visual settings, colorblind settings, audio settings such as like a narrator for the menu for people who have worse eyesight. That's accessibility. Difficulty options is a skill level.
Yes.
So that's how I see it, is that like I would love more accessibility options in the Dark Souls games, but an easy mode is not an accessibility option.
I absolutely agree with that. For example, I played, or actually, I already mentioned this before, like when I talked to you, but I mentioned it later in my video. But yeah, basically, I have a like there was one game I played that was really difficult for me even on easy mode because it basically had no accessibility options, and as a gamer who has left hemiplegic cerebral palsy, it was really difficult for me.
Yeah, that's another big thing that not every Souls game has, is the ability to remap your controller. I
Yes.
think that's a huge accessibility thing that should be added in games rather than focusing on difficulty options. I just personally feel like difficulty options is, I don't think these people actually want accessibility options, the people who are demanding an easy mode. It feels really disingenuous to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I feel the same way. Basically, like when people say like disabled people can't really disabled people can't play Dark Souls, they aren't thinking about disabled people. They are just tired of how difficult the game is for them, and like they don't want to get better.
I mean, a guy beat Dark Souls with bananas. Like, I don't think disabled people have too much to worry about with it,
Hmm.
because you can make that argument that disabled people can't play this game for literally any game. The argument is a fallacy in and of itself, because you can point at any game that you struggle with and go, well, this needs better balancing or better difficulty options because I struggle with it.
Yes.
The thing with Dark Souls is it is a learning experience, and some people don't like that, and that's fine. But I am a huge believer that not every game is made for every person. Games are pieces of art.
I agree with that.
Not every game needs to cater to every single person, because then we lose the individuality and personalities and uniqueness of games.
Yes.
I don't ever think there will be difficulty options in Dark Souls, to be honest.
I don't think there will be either.
I just, the difficulty of Dark Souls is so heavily ingrained into its identity. I mean, the first, like when the DLC version of Dark Souls 1 dropped, the full edition was called Prepare to Die Edition. They were very aware of what they were doing. They're very aware that their games are difficult. That is the point of the games.
Yes.
It's like playing a first-person shooter and being like, well, I want to fight in third person with a sword. I don't want to have to use guns. It's like, then you're playing the wrong game.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to get good sword combat out of an FPS game.
Yes.
You want to go play a fantasy third person RPG, JRPG, something like that for it. So if you don't want to play a game that is difficult, for example, a game I played, it was called Ghost Runner. It's a parkour puzzle game, and it's known for being hard. They have a death counter and a timer in every level, and it counts how long it takes you to get through the level and how many deaths it took to get you through the level. I played one level. I didn't like it because it was way too difficult for me, and I didn't feel like learning it, so I didn't play it.
Yeah.
And that's how that goes, is sometimes games just aren't your thing.
Exactly. It was great to hear from you two. Now, let's talk about my experience with Soulsborne. I played my first and only Soulsborne game, Dark Souls, in late 2021. After hearing people say, disabled people can't play Dark Souls, I had to play it for myself. People said that it was hard, and they were right. I saw "you died" quite often. Sometimes I would defeat enemies only to be defeated by others. With the challenge caused by my cerebral palsy, I had so much difficulty. Sometimes my left hand did not want to cooperate, pressing the wrong buttons or closing when I became too focused, sometimes causing pain if my fingernails dug into my hand. I was tired and frustrated, spewing out curses often. Many times, I wanted to give up, but ironically, I never wished that the game was easier. I would always breathe a sigh of relief when I got to a bonfire or defeated a boss. Yes, sometimes it would take several attempts to get to that bonfire or defeat that boss. With every time I died, I would learn something. Dying a lot was actually very good, because it allowed me to study enemy movements and the layout of the map. I died often, but I got through the game slowly. There was one boss that took me 3 days to defeat. I'm looking at you, Ornstein and Smo. My journey through Dark Souls was filled with pain and frustration, but also triumph. Eventually, I made it to the final boss. The boss is actually very easy if you parry, but I wasn't able to because of my left hand. It was frustrating, but I learned from my mistakes. On my final attempt, I was so focused and tired that my left hand closed and I couldn't open it. The boss was coming at me, so I had to think fast. I quickly put my fist on the control stick and was able to move around while dealing the last hits. I defeated the boss. I won, thus finishing the game. Disabled people can play Dark Souls, and it can be done without difficulty options. I talked about what a Soulsborne game is, difficulty and accessibility, had disabled players talk about their experiences, and I even talked about my own experiences as a disabled Soulsborne player. What is my answer to the question, should Soulsborne games really have an easy mode? My answer is, no, they shouldn't. Let me explain. Soulsborne is a genre. It is known for its difficulty. The director wants the players to overcome their hardships. Implementing an easy mode would give the players less of an incentive to try hard. Plus, the gameplay is very formulaic, so players wouldn't have as big of a learning experience if they played on easy mode. Also, an easy mode would change the genre entirely. It is like making a horror movie less scary simply because someone is too scared. Video games are art, and art is subjective, which means that they do not have to appeal to everyone. Even accessibility is subjective, as game developers may only intend for able-bodied players to play their game, but they can't prevent disabled players from trying and succeeding. Accessibility needs to be implemented in a way that does not change the game's philosophy. To game journalists who are complaining about Soulsborne's difficulty, get good. You have a job, do it right. To people complaining about the series despite not ever having played it, play it. Don't be like that one line from Super Paper Mario. To other disabled players who are trying their best, keep doing it. You all are awesome. It makes me so happy when I see disabled players utterly obliterate bosses and show that they are better than game journalists. And with that, that's all. Thank you all very much for watching, and have a nice day.